We also mentioned that we want to get past the flag. We are tired of hearing about the flag. It's not about the flag. It's not about kneeling for a flag. It's about police brutality. It's about social injustice. It's about Black Lives Matter. It's about black people being murdered and lives being taken unjustly. And if there's going to be an end to the rioting, and I hate to say it, and the violence, something has to change. And if not now, when? We need a change. And so we decided that we wanted to get into in front of the people that can make this change happen. We've been here before, we've heard the talk before, and so we came down and talked with the sheriff and the chief, and we've got their word that we're going to work with them, they're going to work with us, and we're going to put into action, and not just talk, some things that are going to bring back positive change in our community. And we're working on setting a date for a community reform where the law enforcement will come together with the community, and they're angry, they're upset, and we represent them, and that's why we're here today. And so, if you have any questions for myself or any of the pastors, we'll take them at this time.
What needs to change?
The way we're treated, unnecessary force, unnecessary brutality. You saw the video. Everybody's seen the video. That could have well has been here in Clearwater. And then when something like that happened, why did it take so long? I know there's an investigation that need to take place, but when you got a cell phone that's on an officer, and he's sitting there with his hand in his pocket, and the man saying he can't breathe, what need to be investigated? Why was it taking so long for him to be arrested? Things like that need to be checked.
You know, this incident that's happened in Milwaukee has given police forces across the country, if not around the world, an opportunity to reassess themselves and how they do their job. How do you want Clearwater Police and Pinellas County Sheriff's Office to reassess what they do?
That was one of the questions that we had on our agenda, and Chief Slaughter assured us that they've already in the process of doing that. Sheriff Gualtieri assured us that there's a robust program that's going on to attend to those kind of things. And those are the things that we're concerned with. We're concerned with the training that they receive, the psychological assessment that they receive while they're on the job. Because we know as pastors, I came in as a pastor almost 18 years ago, and things have changed, mindset have changed. And so, you know, in a run of a day or a week, anything can happen to a police officer. Coming from home on a bad day, anything can happen. And so we don't know what goes on in the mind of them. And we want to make sure that they're getting the proper training, the proper assessments on an ongoing basis that will kind of catch some of these things that goes on in the mind of a police officer.
What specific actions are you asking the Sheriff's Office and the Police Department to take in response to that?
One thing we want them to do is be transparent, and they have made a commitment to keep us better informed as to how the training is going with their officers, what they're doing in their departments to assure us that these officers are aware that policies are changing. For example, there's no policy, there's no rule, there's no procedure for a knee to be on the neck. And so they're making sure that all of the officers are aware of the proper procedures of takedown, handling prisoners that's already in handcuffs, using tasers. They are going to assure us that these policies and procedures are properly administered.
Do you think you've seen the protests in St. Pete and Tampa go a little bit, south? Do you think the fact that things in Clearwater have been so peaceful has helped you with this dialogue and helped you with the sit down and making positive progress?
Well, it helped us. It helped us. We got calls from some of you asking, why do I think we haven't had it? I don't know why we haven't had any. I thank God, maybe because we've been praying. Not that the other pastors in other cities that haven't been praying, they've been praying also. But we just thank God that Clearwater has not had that problem. And I know we've been through a lot with the McLaughlin situations, and so we remember where we've been and where we came from. And we don't have a whole lot to lose up in there in North Greenwood, so we can't afford to go out and do a whole lot of damage and have to go back to where we live.
Pastor, haven't they built a great deal of trust over the last 20 years, the Clearwater Police Department and Sheriff? Haven't they built a great deal of trust with you, being transparent and making improvements?
With the pastors, yeah, with the Ministry Alliance, they have really put a lot of trust in us. They have they highly respect the Ministerial Alliance and the clergy and the pastors in this community. But it's the community, it's the people in the community, it's the young black men that they have lost the trust with. For whatever reason it is, I was born and raised in this area, so I know that the trust has to be rebuilt there. It has to be reestablished. Growing up in this area, we have not always been friends with the police department.
You brought up Marquise McLaughlin. Do you believe that because that incident ended with justice being served and that his killer was sent to jail and sent to prison for that crime, do you think that kind of played a part in it being so much more peaceful over in Pinellas County?
It played a minute part, not a big part. It was a beginning. We scratched the surface. That's just, and I'm talking from a people standpoint. What happened with Marquise in Clearwater, it represents the whole world of black people, It just can't happen for the McLaughlin family. It got to happen now for the Floyd family. We got to see justice. And for the young man up in Atlanta, we got to happen. I mean, it got to be across the board. Justice got to be. But what we do as pastors, we understand that the Bible talks about in Colossians that we ought to be clothed with the Spirit of Christ. We got to practice justice if we want justice. We can't go out and riot, amen, and damage people, businesses that they've worked all their lives to build and expect God to be pleased with that. He ain't pleased with that. Nor is he pleased with the injustice of Officer Charlotte.
So what is your message to the community? This is a communications, it's a two-way street.
Yes,
so
yes.
gotta give
I want to say to North Greenwood, St. Peter, and the surrounding areas, be encouraged, be strong. Let us let the people know that we're angry. Let them know that our voice is going to be heard. Let us know we're not stopping. Amen. We're going to do whatever we got to do to get this change that we needed. There's got to be a change on these matters that we're facing. We're tired of dying for unnecessary reasons. We're tired. It's got to stop. And if not now, then when?
Sheriff in Chief want to come up?
Mine, sir?
Yes, sir.
Well, thank you. I'm Chief Dan Slaughter with the Clearwater Police Department. I want to thank Pastor Childs and the Upper Pinellas Ministerial Alliance. They have definitely been very kind in their way that they've been allowed to communicate as we talk through this issue. I've said it multiple times, but I'm going to say it again. The incidents that happened in Minneapolis, the death of Mr. Floyd, makes me angry at my own profession. We can do better as a profession. I take great pride in my personal accountability in making sure I run a police department that does everything it can humanly possible do to prevent a situation like that happening. This was a great discussion today. The Ministerial Alliance came with a series of questions and topics that they wanted to review and discuss. They started with our selection process and all the elements that go into that to try to make sure that we get the right person. They talked about our training programs and all the programs we do to try to develop the best talent and the most ethical employee possible. We talked about our systems of accountability and our ability to monitor our employees so that red flags are addressed and not swept under the rug or not left to fester. I think any responsible chief, when they saw the Floyd video, condemned it publicly first. Second is they reiterated their personnel that doesn't happen here. And the third thing they did is they looked at their policy and their training to make sure that we're doing all the things to hold our people to a high standard. From our discussion with the Ministerial Alliance, from my discussions with other leaders in the past week or so, there is room for improvement in our policies. There are some language, as Pastor Childs referred to, with regard to the carotid neck restraint. But what we saw there was not a carotid neck restraint. And so I think we need to be much more clear in our policy that any blocking of the airway on a handcuffed prisoner is totally unacceptable. We've trained it, but I don't think our policy is as clear as I'd like it to be. We have a mechanism or a rule about duty to report. However, I think we can do some improvement in the language there where we require employees, and it's very clearly articulated in our use of force policies, that that is an expectation of our staff. So there was some really good discussion today, and I'm very grateful for it. For us to, we can't just forget about this and move on. This discussion has to continue. And the Ministerial Alliance has challenged us to make sure that we're meeting on a regular occasion and potentially doing a forum, or we're going to do a forum where we're going to discuss more in detail. I'll let the sheriff talk to it, but me and him had a personal conversation last week about how we may not have been doing a really good job of sharing with the public all of the improvements that we have made. And I think that there is an opportunity now for us to have a much more engaged environment with the public. A lot of times you always went through the leadership to get to the public. Right now the public absorbs information faster in a much more rapid rate than ever before. So we're going to have to be involved and engaged to make sure that we're not just communicating through our leadership, but with the community itself. And I think that's something where, you know, a revelation for me in this past week is I haven't done that very well, and I'm going to do it better. Sheriff, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Thanks, Chief. Yeah, I think that's one of the things that we do need to do a better job of communicating with the community about the things that we already have in place. We're getting a lot of questions and a lot of calls for certain things, such as a ban on chokeholds, as they're called, a ban on shooting at moving vehicles, other things that are already in policy and that are already in practice. So I'm putting together a document that we hope to release sometime this week that'll be a comprehensive statement regarding those procedures that we already have, those that we're looking at, and some changes we may make. This discussion and dialogue today is most definitely a step in a good direction, a step in the right direction to a better understanding on both sides as to what the concerns are. But one of the things that we did talk about today, and I've said to others over the last week, as we have looked at what we're doing and not doing and received all these calls for change and for especially these changes to policy, is to make no mistake about it, is that having policies in place is only 50% of the equation. And I suggest to you that a more important part of the equation is agency culture. And that is people who actually do the right thing and insisting that the right thing is being done. Remember, a lot of the things that are being called for, and some people are calling for citizen review boards, they're calling for body cameras, they're calling, guess what? All of those things are already in place in Minneapolis. So we need to think about that. One of the things that I can tell you, based on my experience, is that there was and is a culture problem in the Minneapolis Police Department. You don't have a situation like that where you have an officer that puts his knee on a man's neck for 9 minutes. The man's sitting there screaming, "I can't breathe." And you have 3 other officers who are standing by, not doing what probably we all wanted to do, and I can tell you what I wanted to do, which was to reach through that TV screen and grab him by the shirt and throw him off of him. How does that happen? They got the policies, but they're not effective. And that's a culture problem within the agency. So one of the things that it's incumbent upon all of us to do is to ensure by actions that we have the right culture. I believe that the law enforcement agencies in Pinellas County do have the right culture. That doesn't mean we let our guard down, and that doesn't mean that we don't keep our foot on the gas pedal to make sure that that continues. But that is as important, or I'm going to suggest again, more important than these calls for implement this, implement that, because a lot of it we already have. What people really need to be focused on is making sure that we as agency leaders are accountable and held accountable, and that our people are held accountable for doing the right thing. So I look forward to the community discussion, the community dialogue. I think that what's happened here in Clearwater over the last week is an example of how it should be done. Members of the community here in Clearwater were on the streets. They did march. They did engage in some protest, but it was done in the absolute right way. And I encourage people to use the democratic process, to use democracy, to be heard, to have their voices heard, and to express their displeasure, their distaste, their disdain, their criticism. That's what it's all about. But as long as it's done in a way that is not putting others in harm's way. That's not what we saw in St. Petersburg. That's not what we saw in Tampa. You know, I sat there in St. Petersburg for 4 nights and gotten rocks and bottles and broken glass and thrown at me, and people that had guns, and people were lighting off explosives. That doesn't serve a purpose. That is not going to help. That is not going to heal, and that isn't going to advance the cause. Meetings like this today, and the dialogue and the candid dialogue, and accepting that we all have room to get better, is what is going to get us to the better place and where we all want to be. So again, I thank the Ministerial Alliance for the opportunity to sit down and have this as the first of hopefully many conversations with the community about how to get to that better place.
Sheriff, do you feel like,
How long you met? How long the meeting lasted?
About an hour and a half.
can you talk about the culture thing? Do you feel like some of the community, and you may be getting this, some of the community feel like this is a law enforcement culture? It's not just a Minneapolis culture, it's law enforcement in general. It's a brotherhood. It's, we're standing together.
Yeah, undoubtedly. And that's a perception that some people have. And again, it gets to a point where people, and that leads to distrust. Another thing that leads to the distrust and the questions is a lack of transparency. We need to put it all on the table, or we need to put it all out there so that people get their questions answered. We are revealing all of the documents, we're revealing all the statistics, we're revealing all that information. Because if people don't have an understanding of it, that breeds skepticism and it breeds distrust. So I think, and I know, at least from the things I see and where I sit, and as it relates to the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office, and as it relates to law enforcement in Pinellas County, I think we're doing it the right way. We haven't communicated that, and we haven't put it all out there so that people can see it. And that is the culture that we have to have, that again, it's being done fairly, it's being done right, it's following the law, it's doing the right thing by people, and that isn't always going to happen. You're going to have people that mess up. And when they mess up, they're held accountable for it, and they're held to the highest standards. One of the things that I heard the other night in St. Pete, and I brought it up with this group here today, and many of you know this, is that one of the things I heard the other night is that this isn't fair. This isn't fair as how cops are treated. Because a cop smacks somebody, the cop gets a policy violation. One of their kids or somebody else smacks somebody, they get a quote charge. Well, that isn't how it works here in Pinellas County. That isn't how it works in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office. Go back and look at the number of deputies that I've arrested and charged over the last 9 years that I've been in office. It's too many. One's too many, but we don't do it that way, is that everybody gets treated the same. If there's a basis for it, we do it. So that's a misperception on people's part. Those are the things that we got to keep in mind as we go through this. Now, does that happen everywhere? No. Again, it's a culture, and the culture is different in different places. The policing culture across the country has room for improvement, but the culture here in Pinellas County is on the right track, I believe, and we are moving in the right direction because we are transparent. We need to do more and we need to do better, but we hold our people accountable and we treat people fairly. And when, not if, because there's no perfect in this world, but when people mess up, we deal with them swiftly and we deal with them effectively.
Sure, and for you too, Chief. There are always a couple bad apples in any professional bunch. There are bad journalists, bad cops, bad pastors. And it's difficult to weed that out and find them before they do something wrong. But is there any way you can think of trying to get into the psychology of law enforcement officers to see a problem before it arises?
I think the best thing that we can all do, and we do it now, and we need to look at it and see if there's ways to even make it more robust. And we had some discussion with the pastors about this, Trevor, as it related to psychological exams or other evaluations. I really think the best thing that you can do in a law enforcement organization is to have a very, very robust intervention program, where you have, as an example, a certain number of uses of force within a certain period of time. You have other things that happen that trigger a review, trigger an intervention, and trigger somebody sitting down and looking at it and seeing if there's any problems with what was done, any remedial action that needs to be taken. And some of the best indicators of what people are going to do in the future are what they've done in the past and what they're doing now. I think those intervention systems and intervention programs are the best opportunities to prevent a problem, and I encourage all of us who don't have those type of programs to begin them, and those who do have them to take a look at them and see how you can make them better.
Yeah, I think I'm a big believer in the early intervention program. We have one as well, and I find it a very good mechanism to not only address bad behavior, but also remediate people who can, become better officers and address anything that they may necessarily have as a deficiency, whether it's a communication skill or something else. I also think, as I kind of said earlier, I think you got to pick good people. You got to have good rules in place. You got to train them right, and then you got to hold them accountable to it. And you do those 4 things. I think that's a critical factor as well. And the sheriff alluded to culture. I mean, we need to have a culture where it's not just the chief holding people accountable, but where it is actually the organization and the peers that are holding them accountable. I do believe that, we have a good culture at Clearwater, and I do believe we have examples of when we've done such behavior before, but it doesn't mean something's not slipping through the cracks. So we definitely need to be very robust and definitely give it a lot of attention. And I think not just looking at it after a bad incident, that needs to be something the chief is looking at all the time, and making continual improvements and addressing continual issues. We've done a great job this last year of putting out a robust mental wellness program, so officers who are feeling stress and anxiety can privately go and get some treatment. I think that's critical to making sure that they don't succumb to that stress in the field. It's very critical.
Question for the chief and the sheriff. How often do officers in your agencies report misconduct that they've observed on the job by fellow officers?
So our complaints, we break them up between internal and external. I don't have the data for you exactly, but it tends to be about 50-50. But the complaints will also vary from, they're not all use of force. There's a very small sliver that are use of force or bias issues. The majority of them end up being, not completing your reports on time, all those other kind of housekeeping things. But when it comes to use of force, I probably would articulate the majority of them have come from Clearwater Police Departments. Ours have been internal. They've reported to us internal. We've had a few that we've handled that were the citizen never even wanted to participate in the case, but we still end up holding the employee accountable based on that simple fact alone that it came internally.
But are you seeing like a handful a year, a few a month? Like what's the
For use of force?
For any kind of misconduct that an officer might report on a fellow officer? Any on a fellow officer would include supervision and all that. We're probably dealing with somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 175 inquiries that come to the police department. And when you say misconduct, you're talking about a large breadth of behavior. I mean, that could simply be speeding. So a large portion of that is, I would probably guess, somewhere around 50-50.
Yeah. I don't have that data with me or off the top of my head, so I'm not going to answer it with the specifics, but I would say that it's both, and that we have processes in place where every single use of force incident is reviewed by a supervisor, and if there's video, the video is reviewed. And so a good number of our reviews at a higher level after the initial review come from an internal process. We do have situations where deputies or other employees will make a complaint or make a report, and certainly they come from the outside. So they come from both, but we have very robust internal review processes. We do not require, some agencies do and we don't. We don't require anybody making a complaint that you can make an anonymous complaint. You don't even have to identify yourself. You can just come in, you can call, we have online reporting, and we're going to take a look at anything and everything that's conveyed to us and make a determination as to whether there is a concern or a problem, and then we're going to investigate it. So it comes across the board.
And in St. Pete today, Chief Holloway said that they were going to add to their written policy that officers are required to intervene when they see misconduct.
misconduct, not just reported after the fact? Does the sheriff's office in Clearwater have that on the books right now?
So we have a policy. In fact, I looked at it because somebody asked this question. We've had the policy in place that all deputies are required to report to their immediate supervisor or to internal affairs any violations of rules, law, policy, etc. And we've had that on the books in the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office since 1987. So we've had that policy for a very long time. We'll look at it and see if there's an opportunity to be a little bit more explicit with it, perhaps. But people know and people do it, and we've had that policy. So they are today and have been for the last 30 plus years obligated to report any violations of any policy, law, rule, practice, etc. that's improper.
Sorry, just to clarify, I was asking, are the officers in the sheriff's department right now required to intervene when they see?
Yeah, no, that isn't in there, and that's probably where there's an opportunity to do that. I think there are other areas of the policy where you could say that it is inherently required, but it doesn't explicitly say it. So we're going to add that in there. It is a good idea, just especially in light of these circumstances, to put it in there.
So you are going to add it?
Yeah, we'll add it. But here's what I'm not going to do is, that's why I'm putting together this comprehensive document. I don't want to do this in 1s and 2s and 3s and 4s and do it ad hoc. I want to put all this together in one place at one time and release it, as opposed to trickle it out. So that's that. We're in the process of doing that. So that'll be part of what we do comprehensively.
Sheriff, as a veteran law enforcement officer, how difficult is it to tell on one of your brothers, to say he's doing something wrong? And what sort of backlash is that for the colleagues? Say, hey, you rat it out.
If you're worth anything, it's pretty easy to do because it's the right thing to do. And if you're not willing to do it, then we don't need you or want you. And so it's really not hard at all because it's doing the right thing. And that's what it comes down to, And so I don't think it's a hard thing to do when somebody engages in misconduct to call it out. And that's what they should do, and that's what's expected of them. That's what we do. Frankly, that's what we demand that they do. And they're here to uphold their oath, to ensure public safety, and really held to the highest of standards. And as it's said, to a higher standard than anyone else. And so we insist on that, and when you apply that, it's not hard to do.
Yeah, can the chief answer the question about whether the police has a duty to intervene?
So, like I think all good chiefs would have done across America, they started immediately reviewing their policies based on what they saw. We have a general policy that requires an employee to report misconduct and, of course, intervene if it's a crime. However, I wasn't really satisfied with it. I am already in process of making a couple revisions to inject the same language into our use of force and our less lethal policy, so that it is very clear that the officers have that obligation. We've trained it in the past in scenario-based training, so I'm comfortable that we've communicated to the staff, but I do think it warrants being a little more clear in the policy. And to Chip, to your question, 50 years ago, it may have been a problem. I don't think it's a problem. I mean, I think there's the potential for that, but the officers in today, it's a totally different culture in law enforcement than it was 50 years ago, and I think they understand their obligation, and we've had a couple cases where the officers have done just that, and I'm very proud of our people who stepped up and did the right thing.
Chief and Sheriff, considering all this has been going on, have you considered or reconsidered or thought about body cams for your force?
So the Clearwater City Council heard from some citizens, either through email correspondence and even the citizens to be heard the other night. So they've asked us to kind of put together some information so that we can have a discussion with the council, and we'll go from there. I think to the sheriff's point, I think they're a good conversation to have, and I think there's positive and negatives to body cameras. But whether we end up adding body cameras or not, I want this group of people to know that I'm still committed to moving past that and continuing to try to address what happened to Mr. Floyd, because with body cameras it still happened. And there's video everywhere nowadays, so we capture pretty much everything on video for some way, shape, or form. But we need to make sure that this doesn't happen and not lose sight of just some easy things. So I don't want to stand before you as a chief and say, look, I checked these 2 boxes, I'm a good guy, okay? I want to try to make this profession better, and that's what I'm committing to do. So, thank you.
Yeah, so it's the same thing. we've talked about this many times in the past. You all know where I stand on body cameras. And this incident happened in a police department where they have body cameras. Body cameras and anything else are not the end-all, be-all, the silver lining. The thing is going to prevent it. And again, I'll go back to, you can have body cameras, you can have citizen review boards, you can have all these policies and procedures, and you have all these things. Unless you have the right culture, then it's all for naught. I'll take the right culture and the right people and the right accountability all day, every day in abundance over stuff. And body cameras become stuff, and they become this, well, if we had body cameras, this wouldn't have happened. And body cameras don't ensure accountability and don't ensure that the wrong thing is not going to be done. Look what happened recently in Louisville. Who got fired? The police chief. Why? Why did he get fired? Because they had a body camera program, and guess what? The cops didn't turn the body cameras on. So, you know, this whole, look, we use dash cameras. We have dashboard cameras in every single one of our cruisers. Every deputy wears a mic pack. We capture a lot on video. I wholeheartedly support the use of cameras and the collection of evidence via video and the use of video. The body cameras, as I said it before, and I'll say it again now, body cameras can cause as many problems as they purport to solve. Remember, all they are is one view. They're myopic. They don't see the periphery. They don't hear. They don't see everything else. And here you go, is that 100% of the time, if somebody is equipped with a body camera and they didn't turn that body camera on, or it was turned off accidentally, or whatever happened wasn't captured by the body camera, it's going to 100% of the time call into question the veracity of the officer or the deputy, and that they purposely didn't turn it on and they're concealing something, and that just makes it worse. Then you got all the privacy issues, and then you've got all the retention issues, and you got all of the public records request issues, and you got all the costs, and you're talking about millions and millions of dollars, and you have to weigh the cost benefit. You have to weigh the return on the investment. And my position is the same as it has been. I have no problem with agencies that want to use it. I'm not inclined to use it, and I don't think it's going to solve the problem that people are looking for it to solve. And in some cases, in some situations, it can make it worse, because in the climate we live in today, if it's not captured on video, it didn't happen. And there's a lot of things that happen that aren't captured on that video because, again, it's myopic, it's looking straight forward, it's looking one directional, and there's a lot of things that are around, and you got the on-off issue, you've got all kinds of things we can go through and talk at length about body cameras. But again, I caution anybody to call for any one thing, thinking that that thing is the end-all and be-all, when really the end-all and be-all is just do the right thing and have the culture in place where the cops are going to do the right thing, and you've got people also there, they're going to call them out when they don't, and that includes their peers. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Sheriff. Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Pastor.
Thanks, Dave.
Love that design there.